welcome you all to the 2013 Bihar Growth Conference. This conference is organized by the IGC's India-Bihar program. Now, IGC stands for the International Growth Center. I should take a few minutes to brief you about the program. My task is made very easy because you have in your folder a write-up about the program itself. So what I'll do is try to flag a few items for your consideration. The International Growth Center, or the IGC, is based at the London School of Economics and in partnership with Oxford University has set up 10 programs in Africa and South Asia. And this activity is funded by grants received from DFID. The objective of these programs is to provide independent advice on sustaining and enriching growth in these areas. There are two programs in India, one in Bangladesh and another in Pakistan. The two programs in India are the India Center based in Delhi and the India-Bihar based in Patna. The major activity of the India-Bihar program is to carry out demand-driven research into problems and areas which will help sustain growth in Bihar. We commission work on the basis of demand from policymakers or from their other stakeholders. During the just concluded phase 1 of the IGC, over the last 3 years, the various proposals and projects completed are listed in the folder in front of you. We are happy that whatever was commissioned during this phase has now been completed. You will be able to listen to 7 of these completed projects between today and tomorrow. Many of the others have been presented at previous meetings. In fact, in the recently concluded South Asia conference of the IGC in Delhi, at least 3 of our work commissioned by this program is presented. The variety of the work commissioned consists of rapid response notes. Now, rapid response notes are notes which are written in the short duration of time, where a quick opinion is sought and has to be delivered quickly. Research and an analytical report, where a more in-depth study is required. For dissemination workshops or bigger events such as the one that you are attending today. The dissemination workshops are important to our program and are of crucial importance. It is in these workshops that reports are presented before the concerned departments, and only when this workshop is held and discussions satisfactorily taken into account that the concerned report is taken up for closure. Given the fact that our investigators come from all over the globe, organizing these workshops in a timely manner is a challenge, but we persevere. Thus, the IGC provides a forum where policymakers and researchers interact. It is the responsibility of the program to find out and locate the best available researcher to look into some of the concerns of the government, and then to provide support and supervision to ensure that the work is indeed carried out. One of the major types of work taken up is the evaluation of a program implemented by a government. The important aspect of governance is to find out whether policies adopted are having the desired outcomes. And the current government, over the last few years, has been actively seeking out identification of problems in implementation, and in this the IGC has been able to help. The work of the IGC India-Bihar program is ably supported by the host organization ADRI, and the set of 5 or 6 people who formed the country team. The details of who these people are again in the folder before you. We are in the process of starting phase 2 of the IGC program. And the interaction between policymakers and researchers present here will help us set the agenda for this phase. And we hope we have traveled some distance in phase 1, and we hope to scale some heights in the years ahead. With these words, I now hand over to my colleague of the country team, Dr. Shaibal Gupta.
Professor Robin Burgess, Mr. Kishore Singh, Mr. Pavan Varma, Professor Anjan Mukherji, fellow delegates, friends. On this bright and pleasant morning in Patna, I welcome all of you to the IGC Bihar Growth Conference 2013. We had begun this series of annual conferences in 2010, and our last conference was in December 2011. In contrast to conferences elsewhere, the IGC conference offers a splendid opportunity for policymakers to take part in the discussion on development policies. Today we have the honor and privilege of having the company of 3 distinguished guests, Sri Kishore Singh, Sri Pavan Varma, Professor Robin Burgess. All of them are guiding lights in their own fields and needs no introduction. Sri Kishore Singh is Deputy Chairman of Bihar State Planning Board. He not only leads the planning activity in the state, but is a strategic guide to the state government. Born in Champaran in Sitamarhi district, educated at Banaras Hindu University, Oxford University, Sri Singh's leadership spans several spheres and decades. He has represented India as a Minister of External Affairs and later as an ambassador to Syria. In his present role, he actively leverages this vast experience in guiding the exciting and evolving growth story of Bihar. Sri Pavan Varma, our next guest and chief guest of this inaugural session, is a man with a mission. Sri Varma took voluntary retirement from his illustrious career at the Indian Foreign Service in 2012 and became the cultural advisor to Chief Minister of Bihar, Sri Nitish Kumar. His core mission is to revive and reconstruct the cultural fabric of Bihar with a view of the world of both today and tomorrow. He has inspired fresh thinking and knowledge building through books that became bestsellers. Chanakya's New Manifesto, The Great Indian Middle Class, and Ghalib, The Man and the Times. His latest book is titled Beginning India, The Unfinished Revolution of Culture and Identity. Sri Varma's diplomatic mission have taken him around the world. Today he plays an instrumental role in shaping the emerging agenda of narrative of Bihar. He has an enviable scholarly output, which I am not elaborating now. Clearly, Professor Robin Burgess, who is our president today of the inaugural session, appear as an outlier on this list of guests because he is one of our own. Nonetheless, I have a job to do. He is a professor of economics at London School of Economics, director of IGC, and director of Economic Organization and Public Policy Program at the London School of Economics. His story is extraordinary by any standard. With a BSc in Biology an MSc and DPhil in economics, he has a unique academic foundation. His research and studies in development economics, public economics, political economy, labor and environmental economics highlight his exceptional background and conviction towards building a better world. With the different roles, Professor Burgess is closely associated with the Center of Knowledge, Policy and Research such as MIT, Harvard, Center for Economic Policy Research, the World Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Government of India, and of course, International Growth Center. In coming 2 days, we plan to deliberate on the economy of Bihar based on the finding of IGC's own research as well as those of other scholars. As we all know, Bihar has undergone some political change in the recent past. But I am confident that this is not going to affect the momentum of growth that the state has generated over the last 2 decades, over the last 1 decade or so. It is the desire of IGC to contribute to sustaining this growth process over the years ahead. Thank you. Professor Robin Burgess to take over and to preside over the meeting.
Over to our main guest. I guess when you move from one phase of something to the next phase, you sort of begin to think, well, what was sort of important about the first phase? And I think what was important about the first phase in Bihar definitely was that we caught, almost by a fluke, that Bihar at a stage where things were changing very, very quickly. Nitish Kumar had come in. I had heard from a PhD student of mine at the LSC, who was an IAS officer here. Things were happening, and we came in and we began to do some work. And some of that early work, I mean, the work that Nitish and his government were doing were very, foundational work, law and order, dealing with building lots of new roads and bridges, recruiting many more teachers, and in I think sort of small ways we've managed to sort of add to the knowledge base on which decisions around those sorts of policies were made. And that has been rewarding, not only just to see the state changing itself, but to be playing some role in the background behind those decisions. Of course, if you look to the future, Bihar has a high ambition, and is looking, I guess, like many countries that have gone through this initial stage of state building, to things like energy, electrification, industrialization, so forth, which I'm sure we'll be hearing about in the next couple of days. But the one thing that I must say which was been striking about Bihar has been the very great openness of policymakers, so both ministers, the chief minister, to the ideas, and in fact demanding new ideas, but also the senior civil servants. This is probably the place in the world where we're closest to those demands. And when you consider it's a state of 100 million people trying to, in effect, transform from an almost entirely agricultural economy to something different, it's been rewarding to have that level of closeness to the government. Again, reflecting on phase one, I think we started with some very clear principles. One was that we were going to be demand-led to the degree possible. The second, we would be independent, provide independent advice. and that, again, to the extent possible, we would provide frontier research, so high-quality research. And one thing that's, again, been striking is the willingness to have this sort of direct transmission in the state from research into policy. Now, people are always talking about research into policy, but actually that's not how it usually happens. So typically, if I think back 10 years, my sort of model of research into policy was I would write a paper, and maybe the World Development Report might mention it, or some other people, and then perhaps somebody might read the World Development Report and mention it to a policymaker. So it was an incredibly indirect route. We sort of relied on the multilaterals, the bilaterals, consultants and the like to sort of be the intermediary between what we would call frontier academic research and policy making. And I guess the core idea of the IGC is to make that linkage direct. And I suppose it's indeed impossible for me to point to a country where this has been more successful than in Bihar. So I very much look forward to our guests' contributions and to the next couple of days. Thanks. Hari Kishore Singh, who Shaibal was introduced to give the inaugural lecture. Thank you.
President of the session, Burgess, Mr. Mukherji, Pavan Varma ji, Shaibal Gupta ji, and friends. I am grateful to Shaibal ji and the International Growth Center for inviting me to this occasion. It is a great privilege to share the platform with alumni of Oxford, LSE and Cambridge. And I am reminded of my old days at Oxford and when I used to come to London and to LSE to meet friends and then go to India House for a lavish lunch. Very lavish. You see, we are in India and Bihar and part of South Asia, we are faced with very stupendous challenge of economic growth with social justice. Now this has been the vision of the founding fathers of our constitution and also the product of the sacrifice and the sufferings of the freedom fighters which started, the struggle which started in 1857, the first war of independence, and lasted up to 1947 when we achieved independence and freedom. Now since then, it has been the endeavor of the state to provide a reasonable standard of living to the vast populace, which is now 1 billion and a quarter billion. Now this path has been difficult, painful, as all the process of a newborn takes. But nevertheless, we have made strides, and as has been pointed out by Shaibal, Bihar has, Bihar which was left behind, and for decades its growth was stagnant, and we too could not take the advantage of the liberalized situation of the 90s, and for decades the situation was of stagnation and lawlessness. Now with that backlog, the present government has taken bold initiative, and in a period of 5 to 7 years, this has bear fruit. This has borne fruit, and we have a society which is reasonably under law and order, where law is powerful and power is lawful. Now, the growth, the efforts towards making progress in economic field has been reasonable. Not very wild, but reasonable. At 11% growth rate in the last 5-7 years, we are trying to progress towards achieving an economic standard which will enable us to reach the national average. The government, apart from law and order situation, which Bihar was considered a failed state by all concerned people, nationally and internationally. Now it has become a lawful state where criminals are not happy. There is a speedy process of trial. Many administrative reforms measures have been taken, and both officers and general public, they are now a little afraid, not much, but a little afraid of corrupt measures and unlawful activities. In this scenario, where the Nitish government has taken Bihar from a period of gloom, decadence, lawlessness, to a period of a situation of growth, lawful administration, administrative reforms, and economic advancement. Now in this, because of the economic situation, global economic situation, of which India is part, and Bihar is definitely part of India, and therefore the sufferings of the pains and difficulties which the world economy is facing today, year after year, there is some economic crisis. And now, since we are totally integrated with the international order, so in the globalized situation of today, Bihar is fragile economy, India, its growing economy, is suffering. We suffer a little more than the developed countries. And therefore, we feel that in this context, the role of institutions like yours has a major role to play. Because if India is to progress, and if world has to be a place of peace, prosperity, and growth, then India should be helped, and in India, Bihar should be helped especially. And therefore, I welcome you all to Bihar, and I am sure you are going to enjoy your stay over here. Shaibal is a very good host, and I am sure you will enjoy your stay. Thank you.
Pavan, Kumar, Varma to the lectern.
Kishore Singh ji, my good friend Shaibal Gupta, Professor Robin Burgess, Dr. Anjan Mukherji, and friends. It's a great pleasure for me to be present here today on what I consider to be a very important occasion, the bringing together of the synergies of an organization of the impeccable pedigree as the ADRI with the International Growth Center as part of a continuing process to try and understand what is changing in Bihar, what needs to change, and what can be done about it. I'm an interloper in this meeting because I am neither an economist nor a developmental expert. And Shaibal, in his wonderfully meaningful but inscrutable way, gave me little brief about what I should speak about, apart from saying something to me that sounded like culture and development. But nevertheless, the very elasticity of this brief allows me then much more freedom. In the next 2 days, you will be discussing exceptionally substantive and esoteric subjects. So perhaps a more generalist meditation on some issues which I have over a period of time tried to think about may be of relevance or maybe not. But anyway, for this moment, I have the stage. You see, Bihar presents perhaps the most challenging opportunity for people who want to see the possibilities of development and the barriers to it. In terms of a case study, I think Bihar presents a fascinating template to try and understand what this process is about. A state which was obviously at one point a rich state, or to put it differently in the Indian framework, it was not a poor state. And after 1947, one of the more important states, both numerically and otherwise in the new republic, went through a certain phase where its potential was obviously not only under a shadow but actually brought into great doubt. It's a complex, because what happens with observers often is to try and simplify a paradigm. And yes, there are simplistic features to it. There is poverty, it needs to be removed, there are tools, they can be adopted, and there is a result that you can broadly conceptualize. But actually on the ground, when you deal with societies, when you deal with political processes, when you deal with economic choices, when you deal with funds or the lack of it, when your task is to persuade people to change, when you require leadership and you don't have it, a lot of factors come into this entire game of how you see development happening. And sometimes they are beyond naturally economic indices. Right now, Bihar is on that stage of transition which requires, in any case, to be mapped. Beyond quantifiable results for academics or those who are monitoring it, it's a period that will go down in history as a period of transition where for the first time a state has begun to get the glimmer of the possibility of tangible change on the ground that affects people. That is the difference. And therefore it needs to be mapped. What is the connectivity between culture and development? I have been a professional diplomat. I have some books, Being Indian, Becoming Indian, which deal with the general notions of what defines people. And I believe that there is something in culture which gives you identity. New research says that where you are born, by the time you are 15, that cultural ambience becomes a part of your personality through a process of osmosis. And then you can be a lot of more things, but you can never not be where you were born. So culture gives you identity, and it shows in so many ways. And those who are from Bihar would know instinctively somebody else from Bihar in a myriads of ways about response, behavior, salutation, attitudes, values, and so on and so forth. Culture gives you identity, but the question which should engage development is, beyond this identity, are the attributes of culture changeable? Do people change in spite of the culture that they are born in? Can people be stereotyped as being culturally defined in only a certain particular way, and therefore by interpretation incapable of changing otherwise? This is an interesting thought because, for instance, the British, when they were our masters during the colonial period, consciously gave to Indians a certain cultural profile. And if you read all the documentation, which is essentially steeped in superstition, incapable of initiative, lazy, childlike, needing instruction, which is completely understandable in the context of the times and the situation of those times. Subsequently, there are traits which people pass a stereotypical comment about. For instance, there was this notion that Biharis are lazy inherently. And for a long time, this was a notion that a Bihari will not work because that is ingrained in him to try and avoid work. Now, anyone who will study economics and development will realize that it's a fallacious inference, because how people over a particular time behave is linked to the situation of that time. If in spite of your hard work, the agricultural system is such that you will continue to get what is ordained for you, and the opportunities to maximize this have been reduced to a verifiable zero, why will people work? And then it becomes a habit. Then it becomes a reliance on destiny. Then it becomes that there will be external factors that will bring about change, and that your ability to contribute it is exceptionally limited. So there are reasons to change. The other thing is that, I say this with a lot of humility because experts are here, that you cannot always, even about an attribute, you cannot generalize. For instance, it is said that corruption has become part of our culture. It's true. Perhaps we are more porous to the acceptance of culture for a variety of reasons. I have discussed them in some books. Perhaps we have a moral relativity to ethics. Perhaps our view on ethics is compartmentalized, that ultimately it interprets itself to meaning, if you do it, it's bad. If I benefit, it's okay. Perhaps our training, our ingrained social training is that there is a gap between public morality and private practice. And perhaps over a period of time we take that as normal. But even there are so many exceptions where you have take corruption as a given. You have from Ahmedabad and Surat couriers who carry the diamonds to Mumbai. There is no account, there is no receipt. The diamonds are worth crores of rupees, millions of dollars. There is never, ever, almost an occasion when there has been a theft. Or take another example closer to our heart, betting on cricket. The entire exercise is illegal, but 99% of the bets are honored. So, there are many ways that you can define corruption, or there is corruption, but societies show strange opposites also in terms of behavior. I mean, the entire Marwadi community in India carried on its trade on the basis largely of trust and family connections without papers to back them. So there are examples. Or take the notion of hierarchy. Another of the common stereotypical notions about India, and again partly true. The problem with stereotypes is that they are partly true, is about hierarchy, that Indians are hierarchical. That change will need to penetrate or demolish that edifice of hierarchy. Whether it be the caste system or beyond the caste system, the new caste system of relationship within government. Ministers, bureaucrats, their subordinates and so on and so forth. Yes, it is true that it is a fact, it has been inherited, it is perhaps ingrained in it, but again you cannot generalize, because the gradual democratic empowerment of the Indian people in spite of these ingrained notions has stood that hierarchy on its head. In Lucknow today you have people from the highest caste, the Brahmins, paying money to get a certificate that describes them as scheduled caste in order to get a job or get an admission to a college. So the stigmas are going. Political empowerment has created a new egalitarian field, not completely as yet. It's a long challenge and a long battle, but people change. So the essential point I want to make is, whatever the defining aspects of culture, opportunity, education, better health facilities, jobs, exposure, nutrition, they change people. And they make them better instruments not only of the developmental goal, but make them masters of their own destiny. There is a certain view I sometimes discern among economists sitting in Delhi, whereby they see the poor as some inchoate mass with one cranium less in their brain. In other words, all the planning has to be done for them. They must be merely the passive beneficiaries of what is planned from them outside. Actually, the poor, just like you and me, are very robust vehicles who can see their self-interest if you give them an opportunity to seize it. Give a man half a bighah of land, and he is the most entrenched capitalist who will defend his or her interest. The point is that we have to stop seeing people as, in a sense, pliable puppets in the hands of those who plan for them. They are important engines of growth. And once they have a stake in the system, your whole exercise is to give those who have been outside the system a stake in the system. And the parallel change in psychology is so remarkable that you will see it becomes so much easier for you to reach your goal. Just to give that stake, I'm reminded, for those who understand it, a couplet in Urdu, Wahi jungle, wahi bijli, wahi sayyad ka khauf, par dunya hi badal di hai tameer-e-nisheman ne. It's the same jungle, the same fear of lightning, the same fear of the hunter. But everything has changed ever since I built a small nest of my own in that forest. So give people a stake, they change. Whatever their cultural roots, whatever their cultural attributes, whatever the defining formulas you have for them in your mind, they become partners. I will end by just mentioning one thing which worries me, a non-economist, a generalist, but which I'm sure all of you are concerned with, that while development remains a primary goal in India, I think the time has come when we have to begin to re-examine the instrumentalities to achieve some of its goals. You all do it here in the next 2 days, you do it independently. But in India, for too long, we have placed disproportionate emphasis on state altruism and the top-down model of shoveling money from the top to reach those who need it below. I think we need to re-examine this model, not to question the validity and the legitimacy of state intervention, but to try and see what can be done about the instruments to achieve that goal. Very often when state altruism is married to inadequately developed instrumentalities of implementation, it does not achieve the goal for which it has been set up, and at the same time it sets up an entire scaffolding of corruption where I don't believe the investments justify the results. It's a broader question. So what are the solutions? Because we need in this country to have some form of a catalytic role for the state in order to help the deprived and the poor, of which the numbers are unacceptable. What can we do about it? Do we have more public-private partnerships? Do we have entrepreneurs from the private sector collaborating with government? These are issues that we need to take up. Do we need to, above all, understand that populism, when governments are unstable, is not a solution to enduring long-term solution. It's a great problem, the problem of the working of politics and the achievement of developmental goals. If governments are unstable or with precarious majorities, their natural tendency is to resort to populism rather than long-term foundational solutions. And the best form of populism is to shovel money from top down. But we have to question these things, because I think we cannot waste any more resources unless we make the means to implement them more effective. And nothing in any case will work in this country. And I want to state it almost as an economic principle. Nothing will work in this country unless we begin at the individual level to create a more caring society. The most well-intentioned schemes in India finally flounder because people who are relatively more privileged just don't care for those who are deprived. It's a socially insensitive society. If the successful could have seceded to form their own republic, they would have done that long ago. They can't, because those around them are far more in number, and you cannot do that. But we have to create a more caring society. We have to make people understand that the emancipation of those who are deprived, it is in the interests of those who are more privileged, because except in fantasy, you cannot build the first floor without a ground floor. We need it. We need to take society moving as a whole, and in India, for a variety of reasons which I don't have time to elaborate upon, the notion of care, concern, community, welfare, solidarity, bigger causes, identification with problems beyond one's narrow world, these are values which need to be developed much more. Thank you so much.
So anyway, tea break for a quarter of an hour.